Thanks for tuning in. Today's lesson will be on slow flight and emergency landings. Typically, when you do these in a real plane, you don't take it all the way to the ground. Um, but we're not in a real plane, so we can. And also, usually we don't actually turn the engine off, but that's easy in a simulator, so I'm going to do that too. We're going to start up at Ray Community Airport. I'm going to choose runway 28, although since we have wind turned off, it doesn't matter which direction we take off in. And we're going to start the flight. I'm going to hook you guys up with the actual screen. So, here we are. We're going to let off the brakes. Throttle all the way up. Kick in a little bit of right rudder there, but not too much. Just enough to stay kind of on the center line. Kick it back out as needed. But remember, we're using the rudders to control ourselves on the runway, not the yoke. When we get to about 80, we're going to gently pull back, and we're going to go airborne. I'm going to get up so I can see a little better. So that's really kind of chest level. Get my nose down a little bit, get my speed back up, so we can enjoy max climb. We're going to go to about 3,000 feet or so. On a normal plane, you'll end up kind of flying one hand because this hand is for your throttle and your trim, things like that. It's very rare that you actually need to put both hands on the yoke. Um, Typically, you can do it with just two fingers, which is what I'm doing now. But I'm using buttons on my yoke instead of a throttle quadrant, so I'm able to keep this second hand here. We're doing about 700 feet per minute climb, which is a pretty decent climb. Trying to keep it right about here. Kind of hovering near or at the max climb. As you can see, we'll end up going to 10 here and there. But if we go a little too far back, we're going to slow down again and we're going to lose our climb. So we're crossing through 2,500 here in a second. Remember, again, that's the alternator. It's the altimeter. Little hand is your thousands, and your big hand is the hundreds. So that's 2,800 right there. And as you can see, it moves just like a clock. It'll get closer to 3 as it crosses the 0. Give myself a little bit left right there because I'm not quite flat on the horizon. The artificial horizon I mentioned earlier, this is what we use if we get into instrument meteorological conditions. It's also really good for gauging the depth of your turns. So now we're above 3,000, so we've got plenty of room. So there's a few different kinds of stalls you can enter. This one I've got the throttle all the way up. So I'm going to just start gently pulling back. And we'll just keep pulling back, keep pulling back. You can see this this our speed dropping. That's our airspeed. You know, the motor's still running the same speed, but because we're climbing, our forward airspeed across the wing is dropping further and further and further. And we're just going to keep gently pulling back, add a little more, add a little more, add a little more. You hear that tone? That's our stall warning. And now we've entered an aerodynamic stall. I'm going to let it develop here. Typically you wouldn't. So in this case, we're going to use the rudder to kick it over, and we're going to push down to get out of the stall. But that's to recover from a spin. For you, it's probably best to just practice. As soon as you hear that stall horn warning, we'll get back there. And keep pulling back, keep pulling back, keep pulling back. And as you notice, you'll start to dip a wing when you get too slow. You hear this tone, you just drop. And now you'll regain that airspeed very quickly. And your angle of attack is fixed, and you've got wind going across that wing, so you have really good control. The next thing I'm going to do is take us down to 15,000 RPM. And just keep us level. This amount of thrust isn't enough to keep us airborne. I'll add some more thrust there to keep us right at 15. And we can throw in some flaps if you want. So there's our tone again. Just keep holding it, keep holding it. See, you can control your fall from the rudder, but what you are doing is you are falling at this point. We're descending at 500 feet per minute despite our nose being up. So I'm going to pull us out of the stall by doing that. So when I said last time that you can enter a stall at any speed, that's what I'm talking about. I can do it here at half throttle. I can bring it all the way back up. And I can still enter that stall by just pulling back. If you stop that wind from going across the top of the wing, you will stall. And I will just fall completely out of the air with power to spare if I keep pulling back. I mean, you can't do this. So what we'll do is we'll use our rudder to brake it. Whoa, now we're hitting the do not exceed speed. That's our smooth air speed there in the yellow. Thankfully, I didn't hit the do not exceed speed VNE. Although X-Plane won't penalize me for doing that. I've gotten it to 200 before. In a real plane, you don't want to do that. So one of the things that you should practice is learning how the plane performs in these speed conditions. So bring it over to 15K, or hell, just bring the motor all the way down. And see if you can keep it right at around 60, 65 knots. This will be how you perform a descent while you're landing, except we're at 3,000 feet plus, so we have plenty of room for here or there. I'm just going to pull back a little bit. Now I'm in the white arc. I'll throw in some flaps. Throw in a few more, and then I'm going to nose down to catch that speed because it's going down. I'm going to pull back before it gets too high. I'm going to keep it right there at 60 by pushing in and pulling forward on the yoke. And now if you do this, you'll see turning just is so slow. You can do it, but it seems more like you're really just kind of controlling the pitch of your plane, because that's really what you're doing. You kick in some rudder, and now you're turning. And it's kind of hard to even turn at this speed. So our goal is to try and get, like, even no matter how aggressive you are, you got to get to almost 45 degrees before you're making any serious turn at this speed. And that's really dangerous to do when you're close to the ground. Goal is to get you in the mindset of, when I want to line up my descent correctly and get lined up with the runway before I get down into the landing speeds. And I got a decent amount of altitude just for demonstration purposes, although the wind, that wasn't really doing much for us at this point. I just turned it off for fun. So we're now engine out. We have flaps already. Usually in an engine failure, you don't have flaps built in. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim for max glide. We're going to do that by getting the plane to about 80, 90 knots here. That'll be where we get the most lift. And it seems counterintuitive to, trade that altitude quite like that. But if we want the best glide, it's really what we got to do. And I've kind of picked my landing area. It's going to be this farm here. See if you can get it to the 70, 80, 90. And your temptation is going to be to pull back right now. You will enter a stall and fall. You got to make do with what you've got. So I'll shallow it out right here. Keep that nose high so we don't rip the gear off. And we've settled down. That wasn't perfect. No unplanned emergency landing is. But let's just reset here. This will be at Ray Community Airport again. It's cleaned up the plane for us. My flaps are out. Everything's looking good. So I'll hit my brakes, throttle up. And I'll kick in right rudder again. This time, just for fun, I'll show you a little bit of ground effect. We're going to go here. We're going to pull up. As soon as we get airborne, we're just going to keep it close to the ground so we can speed up. This would be like a soft field. We're now up to a safe climbing speed, so then we're going to do that. And out we go. Ground effect is where, instead of the lift of the wing, it's more of a cushion of air underneath you. And it's why when you're coming in for a landing, you suddenly get, you're dropping, and suddenly you level out and just keep going without touching down on the runway. When you entered ground effect, you've gained new lift, in a manner of speaking, and it's another force you've got to manage. So I've gotten up to about 1,500, 1,700 feet. We're going to do engine failure and climb out. So the first thing we got to do right away is pick our landing zone. We're going to go for max glide. Again, that'll be right about there. Then we're going to say, oh look, there's a road. I'm going to see if I can set it down there. And roads aren't perfect. At least I hope this is a road. For all I know, it's a utility corridor for high tension power lines. It's a little hard to tell from this view. Your first temptation might be, let's turn back toward the airport we came from. And that's called the impossible turn for a reason. And I'll link a good video on the impossible turn in the description here. Because I don't need to do another impossible turn video. There's a bunch of people who have done really good jobs with it, with real airplanes, and they can show you why turning back is often not really possible. So here I am at my max glide speed. I'm using my rudder. I'm going to start the flare here. I don't really know my altitude because my sight picture for random stuff is not great. That's fine. We're right here around 60. And we've set down. In a real emergency landing, you'll want to keep your nose up as long as possible to avoid striking the prop or ripping the front gear off. Those are wish list items. Your goal is not to die. If the plane can fly again, even better. In a flight sim, well, you can just click new flight like I did earlier. But you can see that speed management with the pulling back, pushing forward of the yoke is really critical to setting you up for a good landing. And for your emergency procedures, if you choose to do anything with them. So hopefully it's been a good video for you. You learned something. And get out there and practice just doing slow flight. Learn the stalls. And it's hard in a simulator because in the real world, when that stalls, you're going to feel a buffet coming from the shadow of the wings, not allowing air to hit the elevator in the back that controls your up and down, your pitch, which is your in and out on the stick. And when that happens, the plane kind of drops for a second or shakes as it comes in and out of the airflow that's being disrupted by the now more and more pitched wing. This kind of creates a shadow of air, and when it pitches too much, hold on, this creates a shadow of air, and when it gets too much, it stops hitting the elevator, and then you kind of get this buffeting effect. And then, because your nose up, when it finally breaks, you fall backward. In the simulator, you can't really tell unless you're watching your vertical speed indicator that you're doing this. In real life, it is absolutely terrifying because you feel like a chair that's now been tipped past its point and is now falling backward toward the ground. If you've ever been on a chair in school and leaned back, that feeling you get when you cross the halfway point and you are on your way to the floor, that's what you feel when you've hit an actual stall. And it is unmistakable. And so you want to practice that, see what it looks like here, and listen for that horn. That the second you hear that, you have screwed up. You should be looking at your airspeed to the point you don't ever hear that horn. But if you ever do, you should build a reflex around putting your nose down and regaining that angle of attack again so that you can generate lift and still be an airplane. Because once you've exceeded the critical angle of attack, you no longer have lift and you are a plain piece of metal falling backwards out of the sky. And if you get into a spin, remember, do not use your ailerons to fix it. They don't have wind across them anymore. They're no longer effective at all. You have to steer out with your rudder. It's the only thing that can save you. That's your pedals. So steer into it in order to stop the spinning. Then drop your wings. And you should pull out of a fully developed spin. In real life, I'm not ballsy enough to try that. You have to have a trainer that's rated for spins, and that's not where I'm at. If I eventually get to the point where I do CFI, yeah, you have to do that. And I think in Canada they require it for private pilot, but in the United States it's not required for private pilot. Um, I've seen the videos. If you look up spin training videos on YouTube, there's tons, and um, well, I'm grateful I don't have to do that. I think I'll end up doing it at some point before I need it, if I ever need it, because, there's value in building yourself some muscle memory to get out of a spin and getting over that initial fear of, holy crap, I'm going to die. Um, it could save your life to get spin training, but, not today, not for me, but maybe someday soon. With that, have a great night.